difference in the average earnings, including overtime, of the women and men in any given population. And according to official data, back in 2016, April 2016, the gender pay gap for median earnings was 9.4% for full-time employees. So in effect, men were earning 9.4% more than female full-time employees. When it came to part-time workers, it was the other way around. Women were earning 6% more than part-time males, and when you add both the full-time and the part-time workers together, you end up with women earning 18% less than their male counterparts. But of course, only fair to point out that there are other gender pay gaps out there. So when it comes to how much boys and girls get in terms of pocket money, according to research by the Halifax, on average, boys in the UK receive 13% more in weekly pocket money than girls, while parents give boys aged between 8 and 15 an average of £6.93 a week, and they give girls £6.16. Why is there a gap there? Well, according to the research, it may be because boys are slightly more likely to complain and ask for more compared to girls. So whilst 44% of boys said they were prepared to ask for more, only 39% of girls were going to do similarly. Similarly, when it comes to how much men and women are prepared to pay for goods and services, again, there's a gap. So the next research has been carried out in the States, and it looked at what men and women pay for essentially identical products, but which are marketed separately. So, for instance, it found that girls' baby clothes cost more than those for boys. Shirts for girls can cost 13% more, and toys marketed to girls cost 11% more than those for boys, even if they were exactly the same toys in different colours. The price difference carries over into adulthood, where women's shirts are priced 15% more than men's shirts, and women's shampoo products cost 48% more than products marketed to men. Similarly, women pay 56% more for personal care products, even when the ingredients are similar. And when it comes to old age, support and braces for women are 15% more than those for men, and walking sticks can cost 12% more. The study found that when averaged across a lifetime, women are paying 7% more for comparable products. And similar studies carried out in the UK have found differences, again, both in terms of what men and women pay. So, for instance, women tend to pay more for jeans or things such as razors. So while there are various pay gaps, today we're going to be focusing on the difference in earnings between men and women, and I'll now pass on to Emma and Hugh to talk about their experiences.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charles. Very interesting to know that I'm earning less but paying more for things. For those of you who've not heard of me, I'm a partner and a head of employment. My specialist area is employment law, and I work in a firm in Wales. Gender pay gap is something I've been interested in for quite a long time, so I did lots of equal pay cases. And gender pay and equal pay are very separate things, but obviously they're interlinked because they are all about the difference between the way that men and women are paid. Like Charles, I've put in some opening stats in the first slide. So again, that headline figure of 18.1%, which was the difference according to the Office of National Statistics last year. Now, that figure has come down significantly since the ONS first started to collate this information. They started in 1977, where the stat was about 27%. So there is clear movement there. One of the very interesting things, though, is that that headline figure doesn't tell the whole story, and there is huge variation according to occupational group and age. Last summer there was a report from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and they looked at the figure for mothers, so women who leave the workplace and then take some time out and return. And actually the gender pay gap for that group of people goes up to 33%, so that it's a much more obvious differential. And then an interesting stat that I came across last summer as well, another piece of research, was that this whole idea of whether it is about men and women not asking. There was a study that was done in Australia by the Cass Business School, where they sought to examine whether it was because women weren't asking for pay rises in the same way as men. And in their research was that in like-for-like cases, women were 25% less likely to be given a pay rise than men in response to an ask that they'd actually made. For me, that statistic kind of demonstrates that this is a hugely complex area. So what we have now is the government wanting to advance the cause around gender pay gap. We've had equal pay legislation since 1975, so for a long, long time, and yet we still have a very noticeable gender pay gap. So what is happening is, within the Equality Act 2010, there was a power put in that would enable regulations to be made that would affect private and third sector employers and larger ones with 250 plus employees to publish gender pay info. Now that provision was brought into force, and we now have the final version of the draft regulations that will come into force very soon on the 6th of April this year. Employers who fall into the category of having more than 250 employees will have to publish their gender pay gap regulation information within 12 months of the regulations coming into force, so by the 5th of April 2018. There is also a very similar obligation on public sector bodies. Again, it's for those larger public sector bodies and those with 250 plus employees. It only applies in England, though, not Scotland and Wales. And there's a slight difference to those regulations. There's a difference in relation to the dates, and there's an additional reporting duty, which is all connected to the public sector equality duty and the reporting obligations around those. But the real focus for me today is on the private and third sector, the voluntary sector employers. What has to be published is 6 types of information. The mean gender pay gap for the overall organisation, the median gender pay gap, and the difference between those, of course, is the mean is what I would think of as an average, being that you add everything up and then divide it by the number, but also the median, which is the midpoint. It's actually the median which is used by the Office of National Statistics because they think it is a more accurate way of doing it, so that you get rid of the very lowest and the very highest, which can skew the information. But actually, these regulations require both of those to be produced. Then there's a requirement to look at something called bonus gender pay information, so specifically looking at bonus pay rather than general pay, and again publishing the mean and the median bonus gender pay gap. Around bonuses, there's also an obligation to look at the proportion of male and female employees in your workforce that are receiving bonus payments. So if you have more men receiving bonuses, then obviously that will be a positive percentage that you would need to report on. Plus then there's an attempt to look at your overall pay range. So what you do is you split your males and females up into quartiles, and I'll show you a slide that actually gives a bit more detail around that and what that actually means. In order to understand and start being able to do all of these calculations, it's really important to understand the sort of basic principles of when the pay information is coming in. When you have to do the pay information. And it basically works on a snapshot principle for the gender pay gap. So it's the idea of this snapshot date of the 5th of April in each year, and you use that date to look at your pay that you're paying on that date every year. The regulations use the concept of a relevant pay period, and what that means is if you are an employer that pays monthly, then it is the month's pay that includes, where the month includes the 5th of April, it is that pay period that you factor in for your gender pay information. If you're an employer that pays weekly, then it is the week in which the 5th of April falls. And if you are looking at for weekly pay, then again, it's that 4-week period where the 5th of April falls into that period. So it's that relevant pay period for your gender pay, your hourly rate pay. Then when you look at bonuses, what you have to do is factor in your bonuses for the preceding 12 months up to the 5th of April each year. So for the first year of reporting, we're actually looking at the 12 months going back to the 6th of April 2016, and you should be collating all of that bonus information up to the 5th of April 2017. In order to understand who is captured by the obligation in the gender pay regulations, you need to do a sum and calculate how many employees that you've got. So the threshold figure is 250, and you look at that on your snapshot date. So it's the 5th of April every year. If you're part of a group structure, then you treat each subsidiary company within the group quite separately. The definition of employee for the purpose of these regulations is wider than employee under the Employment Rights Act. It's the same definition that's used in the Equality Act, which is an extended definition. So it includes anyone who's actually employed under a contract of service, so what we would think of as a normal employee, but it also includes apprentices and anybody that is employed on a contract to do work personally. So that would capture freelance contractors that you might have engaged for you. So when you're doing your numbers and working out who your 250 are, then you have contractors, freelance individuals who work on a basis of a single contract for an individual. They will be captured. Casual workers would very likely to be included if they are employed with you on the 5th of April. But obviously if they're not employed with you on the 5th of April, but they're the sort of employees that come and go, then that they would not necessarily count towards your 250. For agency workers, if they are not employed directly by you but employed by the agency, then they are going to be captured by the agency's figures rather than you have to do them. And then there's a very specific provision for partners of law firms, well, firms. They are definitely excluded. Somebody I can see has asked the question, would it include non-executive directors? Very potentially it would if they are employed under a contract to personally do work. There's also a concept in the gender regulations that covers, there's a provision around who is counted and whether they are receiving full pay or not. When the first regulations came out, everything such as maternity pay was all to be included in the definition of pay. And so part of the feedback on those draft regulations was, well, this is going to skew the figures, because if you've got a woman who's off on maternity leave and receiving statutory maternity pay, obviously she's going to be earning less than full pay, and therefore that is going to demonstrate a gender pay gap. So the revised regulations recognise that you may have employees who are absent on leave and receiving less than full pay, and that this could skew the overall picture. So the new regulations have a definition of full pay relevant employees. And this is any employees who are on leave during the relevant pay period, so that period of pay, whether it's monthly, weekly, 4-weekly, whatever, that includes the 5th of April, and who are not during that period in receipt of full pay. The regulations specifically refer to annual leave, sick leave, family leave, so maternity leave, paternity leave, parental leave, all of those types of family leave. Plus it also refers to special leave, so other types of sabbatical leave that you might include. The full pay relevant employees, it's important to remember, are only excluded for when you're calculating your average hourly rates. So when you're looking at your mean and median comparison with your hourly rates and your quartile provision, they're not excluded when you're counting your 250 threshold, and they're not excluded in relation to bonus pay. So, looking at some of the really important definitions and understanding what we actually have to count towards pay, the regulation is very clear. Pay includes basic pay, it includes all kinds of allowances. So if somebody's getting paid an allowance because they do extra things, additional duties, that will count. Any kind of London weighting, geographical weighting, that will count. If they get a car allowance, that will count. A market forces factor premium or any kind of equipment allowance, that counts as pay. Pay for piecework will also count, but usually it will be either or, so you'll either have somebody on basic pay or getting piecework paid. Pay for leave as long as it's full pay, and then any kind of shift premium pay. There's a distinction here because overtime pay is absolutely not included, but pay for working at different times of work, so a weekend shift premium or an out-of-hours premium, that would count. Excluded then is overtime pay, expenses, the value of any salary sacrifice schemes, which does seem potentially somewhat harsh, because if these are schemes that employees are choosing to be part of, actually you have no control over whether it's men or women that are choosing to be part of those schemes, but you have to, if somebody is part of a salary sacrifice scheme, then it is only the pay that remains that is counted. Any benefits in kind, redundancy pay, termination pay, all of that sort of pay is excluded. And what you're working on is gross pay, so before any deductions are made. Bonus pay is defined, and bonus pay includes payments that relate to profit sharing, productivity, performance, incentive or commission, and it's whatever form in which it's paid. So it might actually be hard cash, might be vouchers, or it might be something to do with shares. Again, calculated before any deductions are made from that. And with bonuses, what you're concerned about is not the period to which the bonus is attributable, but the time that the employee actually receives the benefit of the bonus, so at the time the bonus is actually paid. I think somebody did ask, do you include bonuses for those that have left the business? No, you definitely don't. And should the bonus be full-time equivalent? No, it shouldn't. You look at the actual amount of the bonus. So I'm picking up some questions as they come along if they're in the right place, but we'll pick up all the questions later, I'm sure. The first thing that you have to do when you're coming to do your calculations is calculate the gross hourly rate of pay for your male and your female employees. And the regulations set out 6 steps of what you have to do, so I thought it would be helpful to actually do that. Basically, the first thing they say you do is identify all the payments that the individuals have received in the relevant pay period. So you factor in everything, first of all. Then you take away anything that is not pay. You then prorate any bonus pay. Now I'll just spend a little bit of time explaining this. If you pay bonuses during that reference period, they get captured in the gross hourly rate of pay. If you don't pay your bonuses around about April time, then you don't have to worry about them for your gross hourly rate of pay. It's only if they get paid in your April relevant pay period. But to reflect the fact that you're counting potentially a whole annual bonus, and that will skew the figures compared to companies that don't pay their bonuses at that time of year, you are allowed to prorate the bonus pay. So you're allowed to only take into account a 12th of the bonus figure when you're doing your gross hourly rate of pay calculations. So once you've worked out what you're including into your number, you add it all together and you get the total pay of the individuals for that relevant pay period. You're then meant to divide it out so you get to a weekly amount, and the regulations very helpfully tell us how we are meant to treat a month and how we are meant to treat a year in order that we're all working from the same numbers, and we're factoring in, you know, February only having 28 days, whereas April has 30 and other months have more days. Once you've got your weekly amount, you then divide by the number of working hours in a week. And there are some specific provisions about working hours. As I said previously, all overtime is excluded. So if somebody is doing overtime, whether it's paid or unpaid, you are not meant to factor that in at all. For a normal weekly working hour employee, you are supposed to base this on the number of hours that is stated in their contract of employment on the snapshot date. So it's the number of hours for the 5th of April each year. If it's somebody who doesn't have weekly working hours, then what you're required to do is an averaging process, very similar to what we're used to in the idea of the Employment Rights Act and averaging out pay over the last 12 weeks up to the date of the relevant pay period, but excluding excluding any weeks when somebody hasn't worked at all. So for some of your casual employees who might be, if you've got bank employees who might work 1 week but then not the next, potentially you'll be averaging over quite a significant period of time because you need to find 12 weeks that they have actually received pay. If you can't find 12 weeks where they've received pay, then you can use the best number of weeks that you can have. Coming to the actual calculations, I have included in the slides exactly what the calculations are so that you can see these. I'm not necessarily going to talk through all of them because they get quite repetitive, but once you've worked out your gross hourly pay, you then have to work out the average of it, and you then work out the average for men, the average for women, and you express that as a percentage. So if you look at the bit in italics on the bottom of this slide, this explains that an employer with a mean hourly rate of pay for all male full pay equivalent employees of £15.25, this employer also pays women slightly less when looking at the mean rate of 13.42. So once you convert that into a percentage, it's a 12% mean gender pay gap. You do exactly the same thing then for the median hourly pay, the same percentage calculation, and here we have somebody who's, when they've worked out their median hourly rate of pay, men are getting £16, women are getting 13.50, meaning that the overall gender pay gap there is 15.6%. You then do the same for bonuses. And it's again mean and median. I think somebody did ask, do you include those that have left the business since the last bonus pay date? Leavers can be excluded, just to answer that question. So you're only having to, even though you might be calculating bonuses for the whole year, you only have to do the calculation for the people who are still there on the 5th of April. You do the mean and then the median. You also then do the proportions receiving bonus pay. So that, this is very simple. Over the 12 months up to the snapshot date, you work out the number of males that have received a bonus and what percentage of the overall male workforce that is, number of females that are receiving a bonus and what percentage of the overall workforce that is, and then work those out. So you get 2 percentages. So in this case, an employer has 302 male employees, 255 have had a bonus, whereas the 258 of the 258 employees, only 215 have received a bonus. So there's a slight differential in the percentages there. 84.4% of male employees have had a bonus compared to 83.3%. Then the possibly one of the most interesting calculations that you have to do is to split your employees into quartiles. It wasn't clear at all in the first draft of the regulations exactly what this meant, but we now do know. What you're doing is you're splitting your employees into 4 quartiles based on the number of employees. So in the example, we've got 322 full pay relevant employees. You divide 322 by 4, so you end up each of your quartiles is going to have a quarter of the 322, so it's going to be around about 80, 81, as you'll see on the next slide. You then rank your employees based on the gross hourly rate of pay and work out for the lowest paid ones. They fall into the first quarter are in your lowest quartile, the next quarter go into your middle, your next quartile up, and then your next quartile and your next quartile. You can have some difficulties if you've got people that are paid the same and where they cross over boundaries, but you're meant to resolve that by making sure you do that in a gender-balanced way. And then what you come out with is you look at the number of male and female employees that are in each of the pay bands. And just to show you what that looks like, what you don't have to do is say what the pay bands are at all. You don't have to say what the range of pay is for your quartiles. You simply refer to them as the lower middle, and upper quartile. But in this example of those 332, the 81 lowest paid employees, 48 are men and 33 are female. So actually we've got a gender pay gap there where we've got more lowest paid people in this organisation are male compared with female. When we jump, however, to the upper quartile, we can see that there's 80 employees in the upper quartile, 58 are male and 22 are female. So the position is reversed quite considerably. That although the lowest paid employees in this organisation are men, actually the highest paid employees in this organisation are predominantly men as well. In terms of when and how this has to be done, you have to do it within 12 months, so within 12 months of the snapshot date each year. You have to publish the information on your website in the UK in a manner accessible to all employees and the public, which potentially means that it's searchable. So it must be something that's quite easy to find on your website. And you have to put on that information has to remain there for at least 3 years. So you will, in 3 years' time, have 3 years' worth of data. There's also, however, going to be a government website. We haven't yet seen it, it's not been launched as yet, which we understand is going to have a league table type approach so that all companies will report and you'll be seen somewhere in that table as to how you can be compared and benchmarked against other companies. When you publish, you also have to accompany the statistics by a signed statement of truth, and that has to be signed by somebody very senior in your organisation. And the regulation is going into quite a lot of detail about who that is. The big question for me is the so what. What is the enforcement mechanism? What are the consequences if you don't do it? It is a name and shame game only. There is absolutely no financial penalty that can befall your organisation if you do not publish the information. There is some suggestion that the EHRC could use the information to take enforcement action against you, but that's certainly not the message that's coming out of the EHRC, and they're not suggesting that that is part of what they are thinking of doing at all. There's also the possibility that the information could be used by employees to pursue employment tribunal claims around sex discrimination, equal pay, but really what the statistics produce are something that is very difficult to see how that is helpful to a particular individual who wants to pursue a claim. And I would query whether or not they're even enough to shift the burden of proof. What I think they could be, the effect of that though could be that employees will be more aware of your gender pay situation. So if they are concerned about their pay, then the fact that you're publishing might encourage them to ask some more questions. But I mean, I've delivered this seminar to a number of different HR people over the last year, and lots of them have are not sure yet whether they're going to publish. There has been some very helpful ACAS guidance that's come out in recent weeks, published jointly with the Government Equalities Office, and it has a very good step-by-step guide to complying with the regulations. Also has some clarity around some of the complex areas. So one of the questions was kind of gender identity, which category do people fall in? And all that they say about that is that you must treat people sensitively. It also goes on to explain a little bit about the difference between gender pay gap and equal pay, and noting that they are very different things. Equal pay is about people who are working at the same level comparing their pay, whereas gender pay is about people who are lumped in together across the whole organisation. But it also goes on to consider some of the causes of the gender pay gap, and actually tries to encourage employers to be very proactive and adopt a plan to take steps to reduce the gender pay gap going forward. Final thoughts from me before we get on to the questions. Check whether your HR system can cope. Do your figures as soon as possible. Don't be left guessing. You don't have to publish them straight away, but I think if you have an idea of what your figures are likely to look through, you can think about this internally as an organisation and what you want, how best to present them. One of the things you might also look into is whether you can present the historical position, so you can actually show that there's been some improvement in your organisation. Everybody is saying you need to put a narrative around the figures. So your, as HR professionals and also your marketing professionals are bound to want to think very carefully about how you position these figures, and where that fits into what the messages you want to say about your organisation. If you can see any obvious equal pay issues, then now you've got time to fix them before you have to publish. I'm not sure, though, that just doing this exercise really does help you identify the equal pay issues, so where you've got like for like who are not receiving the same level of pay, but very often you tend to know about those anyway. And then, should you consider longer-term solutions and adopt an action plan? You know, that's something for you as organisations, but to think about, and whether, you know, how important this is for the business. The ACAS guidance talks about there being very clear economic benefits to being diverse and to looking at these things positively. That's me as a lawyer giving my perspective and telling you about how the regulations work. What we thought would be very helpful is to actually give an HR director's perspective and to find out what Adrian thinks about it all. So I'm going to ask Adrian a couple of questions, which is, can you just explain, to begin with, Adrian, something about Opus International Consulting Limited and what you do, what employees you have?
Yeah, certainly. We are a civil, structural, traffic and transportation engineering consultancy. We've got approximately 500 UK staff operating over 12 locations. So essentially, we provide consulting, design information on those types of projects.
And you've begun to look at whether or not you can collate the information and do the calculations. How easy have you found that process?
The proposals themselves seem quite complex, and there's actually quite a lot of detail to get into and understand. But having said that, I can understand why it's been written the way it has. And we've been able to report on this fairly easily once we've fully understood the requirements, and we've established our starting position fairly easily.
And where are you in your thinking about whether you're going to publish?
We've not reached a final decision on that, but the current thinking is that we're likely to publish. We want to be transparent and open with our own staff, and also externally. We think it's important to do that. Final decision yet to be taken, but my feeling is we would be likely to publish.
Obviously, if you are going to publish, you're not thinking of just publishing the stats as a sort of bold without any explanation sitting behind them. What sort of thoughts are you having around the narrative?
We absolutely will need a narrative. As an engineering company, we're already aware that we need to attract more females into engineering. So we have an imbalance in terms of the number of females in our business versus the number of males. We have 26% of our workforce are female, and we're fairly active in trying to address that. And for that reason, we need to really put a good narrative alongside the figures. And we perhaps have to educate our own staff, if they view this information, around what the gender pay gap is actually reporting, and that it isn't, for example, the same as an equal pay gap. It's a really important consideration, and we need to give some real thought to how we convey the information.
Thank you very much, Adrian. We're open to questions now. If anybody's got any, Charles, you'll field those and put them to us. Sure.
Yes. Thank you very much, Emma and Adrian, for your very interesting presentations. I think one of the questions that I noticed was around what happens if people receive a bonus which they then sacrifice into a pension scheme. How is that that issue dealt with?
I think you have to count the bonus. I've just been looking at what the ACAS guidance says about it. The regulations don't deal with it directly, but the starting point is how what's on the pay slip, and so you start with if pay is then being deducted into pension, I think that means that the bonus would count. But I think that's an excellent question that I thought, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer that. I think that's detail, but my instinctive reaction is to say bonus counts even if it's waived into pension scheme.
Another question was around company cars and also the option of getting a car allowance. So how would you look at company cars as part of the gender pay gap reporting, and how would you deal with those instances where people have opted for an allowance rather than for a car itself?
The regulations are very, very clear. If you are paying a car allowance, that is factored into pay, but if other people are taking company cars, then you exclude that because it's a benefit in kind. So I think the way that you would address that is explaining that in your narrative, if that is creating any kind of gender pay skewing effect. I mean, whether or not it's creating a skewing effect will depend on the proportion of men and women that are doing one or the other. If you've got all women taking allowances and all men taking the company cars, that actually might end up having a very positive effect.
Another question was around bonuses and what happens if those parts of that bonus is paid in share options or restricted shares. How would you value that in terms of gender pay gap reporting? Would you kind of look at the value realised in the year or the grant value?
Again, the regulations aren't very clear as to what to do, but yes, that is what I would agree that's it. It's the point in which it's paid. So if you are, for example, if you're issuing shares, obviously they have a particular value. If you're issuing options in shares, well, you assume that they have a particular market value because that is what the tax position will be based on. So it's that market value at the time of issue or the time of grant if it's a share option.
So the shares would be at vesting then?
Yes.
So what happens then if it wasn't part of the bonus scheme? You just got shares separately. Would that then be part of pay?
Oh, no, that's a very good question. The regulations aren't clear. They're not excluded from pay, but it is only bonus pay that where securities, so paying in the form of securities, includes shares. So, I mean, if it was a regular part of somebody's remuneration package that was just as a matter of course, I think it would be excluded from pay unless there was a bonus relationship to it.
Well, there'll be opportunities for you to check this at a later stage, Emma, and we can amend the webinar as appropriate. Another question was around what happens for companies that are employing people overseas. So either they've got British people working overseas, or they've got people who are from overseas working in the UK. How are those people dealt with?
In the original draft of the regulations, there was a very specific provision to say that it was UK-based employees, but that has disappeared, which means that the current commentators are thinking, including me, that if an employee could bring a claim under the Equality Act, notwithstanding that they're based overseas, they will count towards the 250 threshold, and they will count in terms of their numbers. You need to include them in the pay information.
Great. We've got a few questions around bonuses. For instance, just to clarify, if an annual bonus is paid in December each year, this chap was wondering whether it's right in thinking that only 1/12 of that bonus is taken into account for calculation purposes, or is it across the year?
No, this is exactly it's a bizarre kind of odd bit about the regulations. Unless you pay your bonuses around April, so the pay period that includes the 5th of April, you do not have to put your bonus pay into your average pay calculation. It's only if you pay your bonuses in April that you count bonus pay into that calculation. So a very sensible way of avoiding having to do that would be to make sure you don't pay your bonuses in April.
So what happens if you pay your bonuses in November then? How would you count it? You would calculate it over the year?
Yeah, your average hourly rate of pay, you can ignore bonuses for that purpose, but when you look at your bonus pay, your bonus pay is bonuses that are paid in the 12 months preceding the 5th of April. So if you've paid your bonuses in December 2016, it's that bonus pay that will count, that you'll need to report on by the 5th of April 2018.
Another query is, is there an implication for Ireland from the gender pay gap reporting? I suppose many of our members will be working in Ireland, and some will be based in the Republic, and others will be based in Northern Ireland, and what types of employees? I suppose to a certain extent it also covers, the issue around people, international workers as well.
Yeah, I mean it's the UK company, the company that is in the UK that is captured by the regulations. So any subsid companies that are based in Southern Ireland will not be captured by the regulations because they're outside of the UK legislation. But if you've got somebody who is seconded to go and work out there, then obviously they will count if they have a contract with a UK company.
Another query is that some organisations allow their employees to convert their bonus into company shares. Is this counted in the bonus calculation, or will it be excluded?
Shares, any bonus that is paid, whether it's through the form of shares or through the form of cash, has to be counted. And then you have that issue about how you actually value the shares. It's easier if actually you're converting a cash bonus into shares because you know what the value of the cash bonus is.
Great. We're getting quite a lot of these questions. You've talked about the definition of subsidiary, but you've talked about subsidiaries. What is the definition of a subsidiary, and how would that differ from the PAYE tax reference?
What I mean by a subsidiary is a Companies Act subsidiary. So one of the complications, I think I've got one client who they have a very complex payroll arrangement. So parent company has 250 plus employees, but if one of the subsidiary companies, you know, UK something else, only has 20 employees, then that company can be excluded, but parent company would still have to factor it in for their employees. So you need to know, if you've got a complex group structure, exactly which individuals are employed by which group company. It's got the tax payroll reference, and who actually manages the payroll is not part of the consideration at all.
So I think we just had another question about an instance where they've got 3 offices in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, each with fewer than 10 employees. Presumably it would be a case of aggregating that information together to get the total numbers.
Let me just go back to that question, sorry. So it was, are they all, they're based in the different places, but are they employed by the same company?
Yes, they have 3 small offices.
Yes, so 3 small offices, each with, they would be included, providing overall, so the English office has 250 altogether. Yes, thank you for clarifying. The vast majority of employees are in England, unless the Scottish, Wales and Northern Ireland offices are structured. There is a structure so that there's actually a separate company. So there's whatever the company is, Wales Limited. Then the 10 or less than 10 will be included. So yeah, so you're all the same organisation. Now, is this a private sector or voluntary sector organisation? As long as it's a private sector or voluntary sector organisation, that is the case. Slightly more complex if it's a public authority, because of the way the public sector regulations are being brought in. They're not necessarily capturing Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland in the public sector.
Another question was around the length that you'd be reasonably expected to go to kind of identify consultants on the payroll?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, because that was something I should have mentioned, which is where you've got consultants, there is a specific exemption in the regulations where if you can't, you need to identify them, but if you don't have the relevant pay information and it's not reasonable for you to obtain it, you can exclude them from the calculations. So they will count towards your 250, but they won't, if you don't know what, you know, for example, you don't monitor exactly what their hours are that they work, then you've got this definition, not reasonably practicable for you to obtain the data, then you can exclude them from your calculations.
Another thing would be, another query has been around long-term incentive plans, which, you know, typically for executives. Would they be treated as part of a bonus, or again, would they be part of pay, or?
Long-term incentive plans are bonuses.
Right.
So you need to look at when payment under those plans is actually made. So it's not the period for which the incentive is earned. So it might be, you know, there might be a 3-year period over which somebody's performance or contribution to the company's performance is measured. You don't look at the whole 3 years. You look at when some sort of payment under that incentive plan is made, whether or not that's in the form of cash or securities.
Another question is around how to deal with, for instance, casual employees who haven't got a total of 12 weeks pay during the year to average, and presumably that could also apply to new employees as well.
You just have to do the best you can. So you use as many weeks as you possibly can in order to prorate it. That's something that's quite well dealt with in the ACAS guidance.
So what you talked about the public sector and how that may differ in Wales, for instance, or Scotland. What are the main differences there?
The reason why there are differences in Wales and Scotland, and most likely Northern Ireland, is because the regulations are being brought in through the public sector equality duty obligation, and so that's actually devolved. So it's the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government that have the power to bring in the equivalent regulations to apply to Scottish and Welsh, and the same in Northern Ireland, public authorities there, and they haven't yet done it. I met with somebody from. I'm based in Wales, so I'm keen to find out when it's happening in Wales, and I met with somebody from the Welsh Government the other day, and there is no current plans because they already have much more onerous reporting obligations under the public sector equality duty regulations that are in force in Wales already.
So you think that they will keep, so for a public sector organisation in Wales, you'll use the existing requirements rather than the ones that are going to come up from the gender pay gap?
Yes, I think so. But I think there will also be an underlying pressure on organisations that if they've got this information or they can easily put this information together, then they should be producing it anyway. In Wales, within 2 weeks of the draft regulations being published, all of the local authorities in Wales had freedom of information requests asking for this information. So I think in the end, the same standard information will be required of all organisations, providing they've got more than 250 employees.
Well, I think we've got quite a lot of other questions as well, but I think what will be useful is after the end of the webinar, you'll be able to the opportunity, Emma, to kind of perhaps go through some of these, and we'll be able to put them on our website and let people, when we email out to people who listen to the webinar, to let them know that it's now available on our website, and people will also have the opportunity to see how you responded to some of those Q&As that we haven't been able to get through, as well as some of the ones that we've already discussed in case that you'd like to add some more clarification. So I think
I would say there's one question there about housing associations.
Yeah.
Housing associations definitely count as private organisations for this purpose.
Yes, though I suppose even if they had been voluntary, they'd have been picked up. They would have been picked up anyway, wouldn't they? I suppose.
Yeah, they're not public authorities. The organisations that are public authorities are those that are listed in the schedules to the Freedom of Information Act. So anybody who's not listed there is included. Great.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Emma, and also Adrian as well for presenting this afternoon. I've found it quite interesting, both for your insights, Emma, and how your organisation, Adrian, is dealing with these issues. Just to reiterate that the webinar will be available on the CIPD's website, and we will be emailing participants to let them know when the webinar is on our website for you to download. Just to remind you that the CIPD will be having a reward SIG webinar in May time, and to look out for details about that. So I'd like to wish you all the best for the rest of the day, and thank you for listening to the CIPD's webinar. Thank you.